Okay, in this video we're going to look at some of the conflicts that occurred during the interwar period. The interwar period, which is basically from 1918 to 1939, was marked by numerous sort of lesser known conflicts and military interventions that can offer quite unique scenarios and interesting tactics for wargamers. And in this video we're going to kind of look at some of the more intriguing conflicts you could explore. So the first off is the Russian Civil War, which is 1917 to 1923. It was a chaotic conflict involving Reds, Whites, anarchists, foreign interventions and national independence movements. It's ideal for skirmishes and large battles with various forces. So the next is the Polish-Soviet War, which ran from 1919 to 1921. Now, this conflict saw Poland and Soviet Russia clash over Eastern Europe. It involved early tank battles. It also included a lot of cavalry charges and a lot of asymmetrical warfare, and that kind of provides a fascinating blend of old and new tactics, which may interest a lot of players. Now, the next one to look at is the Greco-Turkish War, which was of 1919 to 1922. And is part of the Turkish War of Independence. This conflict featured both Greek and Turkish forces, which had distinct styles and also had the complexity of both trench and urban warfare. Next on our list is the Rif War, which went from 1920 to 1927. And it's a Spanish and French colonial forces fought against Berber tribes in Morocco. Now, this is a more guerrilla-style conflict, which was fought in mountainous terrain and is ideal for skirmish and asymmetrical warfare scenarios. Now, the next war on our list is the Cho War, which was 1932 to 1935, and it was fought between Bolivia and Paraguay over the Gran Chaco. And this involved a lot of trench warfare, a heavy use of snipers, fought in harsh desert conditions, which presents some unique logistical challenges. Now, another war to look at if we move over to Asia, and it's the First Chinese Civil War. And it was that was fought between 1927 to 1937. And in the early phase of the war between the Chinese Nationalist Party, KMT, and the Chinese Communist Party. And it offers some opportunities for some rural skirmishes, a lot of ambushes, and evolving tactics with very limited resources. Next, if we stay in Asia, is the invasion of Manchuria, which was in 1931, and it was Japan's invasion of Manchuria, and it offers a really good opportunity to explore sort of the very early World War II style engagements on a much smaller scale. It has a good mix of Japanese infantry, light tanks, and Chinese sort of resistance forces. So you get a good mix of sort of guerrilla and set-piece skirmish battles. Another one to look at in this sort of similar period is the Italo-Ethiopian War, so it takes us over into Africa, and it's 1935 to 37, and it's in Italy's invasion of Ethiopia, and it features modern mechanized forces against traditional Ethiopian fighters. And this is ideal for the gamer that wants to sort of get into asymmetrical war games with guerrilla warfare tactics in rugged terrain. Now, for the next conflict, we shoot right across back to Europe, and in this case, Ireland, and it's the Irish Civil War, which was lasted from 1922 to 1923, and it was fought between pro-treaty and anti-treaty Irish forces. Now, this conflict offers both urban and rural skirmish scenarios with pretty much makeshift tactics, and was focuses on ambushes and street fighting. Now we're going to fly right across over to the Americas, and it's the Banana Wars. And this was a series of different interventions that went from 1918 to 1934 by the US in Central America and the Caribbean. And these conflicts included guerrilla engagements in jungle conditions. And it's ideal for small unit tactics. And it probably gave them a good training ground for when they fought the Japanese during World War II. Now, the next conflict was fought in 1935, and it's the Tsar plebiscite crisis. I think I've got that correct. I'm not sure. Well, it's not this isn't a full-scale war. It's a sort of tense, militarized border standoff between France and Germany during the Tsar plebiscite, and it could be used as a sort of what-if scenario war game. The next one I want to sort of mention is we're going right back to Asia again. And this time it's the Soviet invasion of Xinyang in 1934. Now, this is not a very well-known conflict, but it did involve Soviet and Chinese forces in the Chinese Xinyang province, and it provides a good mix of desert and mountain skirmishes with light artillery and infantry. So that's quite a good one for that side of warfare. We're then going to fly back to Austria. Back to Europe and Austria, and it's the Civil War in Austria in 1934. Now, this is a brief, intense conflict between the Austrian government forces and socialist militia. It's really perfect for anyone that wants to get into playing out urban warfare scenarios with like street barricades, close quarter combat, and small arms. It's really good, intense street fighting conflict if anyone wants to try out those types of scenarios. The next one is a bit of an old one. It's called the War of the Stray Dog, and it was in 1925. It's quite an odd skirmish that erupted between Greece and Bulgaria over a cross-border incident. Now, this is a pretty short conflict, and it could make for a more sort of interesting border standoff, and it does have some trench-based skirmishes. It's not a big conflict, but it kind of an interesting, weird one. Then we have the Franco-Syrian War in 1920, and this is where France's military intervention into Syria following World War I, which saw a lot of clashes between local forces, and it's ideal for anyone wanting to do early war sort of desert warfare scenarios and exploring the early 20th century colonial conflicts. For anyone that wants to do winter warfare, we fly back to Finland, and we have the Finnish Civil War in 1918, and this is fought between the Finnish whites and reds with German and Russian influences. Obviously, the Germans are influencing the whites, and the reds are being influenced by Russia. And this conflict involves both open field and urban combat scenarios, and is fought in sort of winter operations and winter conditions. So that gives you that. If anyone wants to fight winter-style scenarios, it's a good one. Now we're going to go back to Asia, and we've got the Manchurian Incident, and it's a continuation of the Manchurian campaign and invasion, and it goes from 1931 to 1932, and it's the Japanese forces again clashing with the Chinese troops in what is basically the early stages of the Second Sino-Japanese War. And this all involves a good mix of sort of urban battles, railroad ambushes. So anyone wants to do sort of those battles involving trains and railways, this is a good conflict to touch on. And it also includes some very early tank and aircraft deployment. Now we're going to go back towards Europe, and then we have the Turkish Armenian War in 1920. Now this is a very short conflict. It has some very high stakes as Armenia and Turkey clash over territory, and it features infantry skirmishes and small artillery engagements, mainly in mountainous terrain. Now we're going to go back to Finland, And this time it's not the Civil War, but it is a Soviet-Finnish border conflict, and it's in the 1920s. It was an on and off sort of thing, and it was border skirmishes between Soviet and Finnish forces. Often they were tense, small engagements in winter terrain, and it's sort of ideal for sort of ambushes and reconnaissance missions. And for the next conflict, we're going back over to Asia and China again, and we've got the Shanghai Incident in 1932, and this is where Japan fights conflicts with Chinese forces in Shanghai, and is ideal for urban wargaming. It is intense street battles with barricades, and it has a mixture of naval and ground forces. It's quite a good one for anyone wanting to do a city battle scenario. Now, all of these conflicts each bring distinctive tactical and strategic elements, things like guerrilla warfare, urban street fighting, as well as trench warfare, colonial skirmishes, all of which offer and make for quite a rich and unique gaming experience. Now, these are conflicts set between the two major wars. And so what is good about this fighting in this sort of period is that you're getting the end of the equipment and military technology from the end of World War I, and it's slowly developing into what we get in World War II. So you've got that balance of World War I, pre-World War, early World War II equipment, and it's that development of military technology during those two big wars. And these aren't massive conflicts; they're all fairly small in comparison to the First and Second World War, but they do give you a flavour of that transition from the first to the second, a different style of warfare, the sort of beginning of mechanized warfare, tank warfare, that sort of developed a lot more than what we saw a huge amount of in World War II. So you get to give that sort of experimenting with those sort of early, more advanced tanks from the end of the First World War up to the early part of the Second World War. And there's some interesting conflicts and scenarios that can be played out, especially for anyone that's bolt action, rapid fire, and wants something different than playing World War II based scenarios. You could pick up one or two of these conflicts and play in a slightly earlier sort of military technology history sort of period before the development of Second World War and all the military kit that you normally would game with. You get to play with some of the earlier equipment and probably do a lot more infantry based missions and scenarios within those interwar periods. I mean, on top of that, you've got other major campaigns during that period, like the Spanish Civil War, which we didn't really kind of mention because I was looking at smaller engagements rather than major conflicts. But that period between the two big wars wasn't that very quiet. In reality, there was conflicts springing up everywhere during that period. It was a period. It wasn't a period of peace as such. It was a period of quite sporadic conflict. When you start to look at the interwar period, you can see that First World War didn't really wrap things up, so to speak. That the Second World War was inevitable. The amount of conflict that was going on between the two, it was inevitable we were going to end up in another major world conflict. It was just a matter of time, and it was any one of the sort of conflicts that were occurring during the interwar period could have sparked off major conflict like the World War II. And eventually it was Germany's invasion of Poland and that sort of thing, and then Japan's sort of invasions into like China and then down through sort of Burma, Thailand and towards Singapore, or they eventually sparked off the global conflict of the Second World War. But like I said, there's quite a lot of interwar ones that are quite interesting to look at, quite interesting to maybe play out some scenarios. And they could have, some of those could have sparked off the war a lot earlier. And if you start to look at Japan's conflicts, effectively Japan's Asia's World War II did start a lot earlier. It started in the 1930s when they invaded Manchuria. They came down into China, and so it didn't really start in 1939. It started effectively in 1930s, early 30s, when Japan started making those moves. Anyway, that's all for this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I shall see you next time.